I was the kid in high school who walked around with a little notebook scribbling this epic fantasy um, magnum opus into it. It was terrible, but I was trying, and that's kind of where I really started. And I would just conjure stories for fun. It'd be a beautiful day outside, and I'd go sit on the rooftop with a notebook and scribble.
Hello and welcome to the special author Q&A for FanFiAddict. I'm Frasier Armitage, sci-fi writer and reviewer for FanFiAddict.com, and joining me today is the awesome Lavanya Lakshminarayan. Lavanya, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Frasier. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to get to talk to you, and today we're going to be especially focusing on your latest book. For those of you who don't know, Lavanya has a book that's coming out at the end of March called The 10% Thief. This is my advanced copy here, and it is absolutely amazing. We're going to dive into The 10% Thief in a little while, Lavanya, but first, I just was curious about your author journey. So, what's your origin story as a writer? What made you want to write, and why science fiction?
Oh, this is a long answer, Frasier. I think I knew I wanted to write when I was 8 years old. I think I was reading, it must have been Narnia at the time, and I just thought, oh my goodness, these worlds are fantastic, and I want to be able to create worlds. And so this was sort of in the back of my mind when I was really, really young. And when I was 13, I read, or maybe I was 12, I read The Lord of the Rings, and I thought, oh my goodness, now I really want to write. And so I was the kid in high school who walked around with a little notebook scribbling this epic fantasy magnum opus into it. It was terrible, but I was trying. And that's kind of where I really started. And I would just conjure stories for fun. It'd be a beautiful day outside, and I'd go sit on the rooftop with a notebook and scribble. Um, Cut 10 years into the future, when I graduated university, I happened to wind up working in video games and in the gaming industry. And the people I was working with are very kind because they found out that I really enjoyed writing, and they said, oh, why don't you try writing a couple of quests? And so I started writing quests, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was writing these bigger and bigger world building scale things for games. And these were things. So some of the stuff I had to write would take me a week or a day, and then there were things I worked on that took an entire year, from kind of concepts to actually being out there in the world. And I think that's really where I kind of consolidated my understanding of what it takes to create and what it takes to write, because the beginnings are always easy. It's sticking with it through all the bad days and all the days when you feel completely uninspired until you make it out the other side. Um, that's kind of what I learned from working in games, and that all of that just got fueled into the 10% thief.
Awesome. I love that expression about conjuring a story, because there is something magical about writing, isn't there? About that process of creation. If beginnings are easy, Lavanya, then where did you begin with this book, with the 10% Thief? What was the spark that initially got you thinking about this?
Well, I wasn't expecting to actually write this book, especially not in the form that it took and the shape that it took. Um, this one actually began with a very personal experience. So I worked in games, and gaming is this really high intensity, nonstop job. It is really high pressure, and so I found myself with very little time to actually go outdoors and do regular outdoor things like, I don't know, buy my own groceries or go to a department store, or buy light bulbs in a hardware store, right? Like I never had those while I was working in games, and I would just order everything online and have it delivered because I was always plugged in to my laptop and working. And I remember the first time I took a break and thought, this feels like a really beautiful day. Let me go outside and actually walk into a grocery store and buy myself produce so that I can make my own dinner. And I walked into this grocery store and I had a full fledged panic attack. I looked at the shelves and they were overwhelming. I didn't know how to choose what to buy. And just the physicality of being surrounded by real world objects that I could pick up was so disorientating. I thought, this is really odd and it's kind of scary because I've been reliant on technology to do all of this for me. And I'm so used to picking up stuff in 2D off a computer or off my phone that I don't know how to navigate the real world anymore. And that ended up being a story in this book. It's called Analog Virtual, where one of my characters has to do grocery shopping in the real world. So the book started there. And when it started there, I thought, hang on, this could be more. I feel like there's an entire world and there must be myriad perspectives to tell in this sort of tech dependent, highly reliant upon productivity sort of bubble that I have been living in. Let me see where it goes. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit. And and then suddenly there was a book.
That's amazing. And it's so interesting to see where it started from and the spark to the finished product, because the hook of this book is all about this idea of productivity and this world that is separated by those who are productive and those who are considered to be unproductive. And it is such a brilliant hook for the world itself. Did you find yourself as you were building it, that the kind of pitch for the book would sort of change over time, the more that you wrote?
Oh, thank you for your kind words. And absolutely. I mean, once I had this story down, I started being far more observant of people who were around me, right? And the way they were interacting with technology and the types of conversations we would have. And so again, I was, the adult wandering around with a little notebook and just kind of making notes to refer to later. And it sprung off from this. And I started thinking more about these experiences and putting them down. And the experiences ranged from being absolutely flat out hilarious. There was this instance where I was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and we were all being so self referential about the same types of stuff. Of videos we were watching on YouTube. And sitting there was this sort of outer body experience where I thought, wow, this is a real world echo chamber, a product of our online echo chamber. And, that was funny to me. But then it also grew dark in my head as I started writing about it. So writing it was this constant process of readjusting the tone I was bringing to it, because it's dark, but there's also room for satire in the darkness. And in the darkness is where you also find maybe glimmers of hope, or at least that was my intention. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And you pulled it off, because there are so many different aspects to these stories. The way that it's structured is that it's all about this city, Apex City, and characters within it. And it's structured like you've described it, as a mosaic. So it's all of these different perspectives of different characters that come together. But some of these are so insightful, and some of them are funny, and some of them are dark, but they're all of them. They've got the same kinds of. They all fit together. How challenging was it putting all of these perspectives together and trying to keep that tone consistent across the book?
It was tough. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I had a conspiracy board up on the wall, like right behind my computer up there, um, where I had, each of my characters and kind of what they were going through. Um, and I had to keep kind of, to begin with, I had to kind of put it all out there up on a wall in visual form to even see how this could fit together. So it was like playing with a jigsaw puzzle, like constantly rearranging perspectives and figuring out in what order do these perspectives make most sense? How can I tie them together? Um, how do I go dark but not completely bleak? Because, a lot of what I'm writing about in the novel has to do with techno-capitalism and how bad it can go for humanity. But I didn't want to make it a depressing book. I kind of wanted to also appeal to the fact that we can take stock of the situation right now and change it. Um, but putting it up there and just figuring out what could be a linear progression in a very jagged jigsaw puzzle structure. That was really difficult. In fact, what I ended up doing was rearranging these stories multiple times. Once they were all written and I had them up on the wall as high level ideas, I would keep switching them around and thinking, oh, this makes more sense here, but I've already introduced this character earlier, so where does it go? And um, so it ended up being quite a number of not major rewrites, but tiny little detail oriented rewrites to get it all together in the form it is right now.
Yeah, it's really good. And with all of these different characters, there's something really relatable about them. It's set in this advanced future, but it feels like it's happening, like it could be a commentary on the world that we're in at the moment. But so there's this aspect of relatability there. I was wondering what was more important to you as you were writing it, fitting in social commentary or making the characters relatable. What was the lens with which you were trying to sort of approach these characters with?
Honestly, I think it differed from story to story, really, because there are some where I really zoom into a character's life and, walk 10 miles in their shoes and really try and understand them as people. And then there are some where I've zoomed out a lot and, tried to present characters as minor players in a bigger social context. Um, so it was like a balancing act, honestly. Once I was done writing everything I wanted to write, I had to kind of revisit again and take a look at how things were adding up in the bigger picture. So it was a little bit of both, if I'm being really honest. Eventually, when I did have all my notes and I was rearranging things, I remember my notes being structured so that it went, character name and what's their story about, and then what is the social commentary I'm doing here. And in some cases it was more understated social commentary, in others it was very overt. And so that was another bit of connecting the dots and putting the jigsaw puzzle together. Like, I didn't want it to be, even though there is a lot of social commentary happening between the lines, I didn't want to spell it out too much all the time.
Yeah, the balance that you're talking about is absolutely perfect, and it really leads to some surprises. Because, like for example, in stories like Avatar, which is a story about these people who are known to the world by their avatars, their online avatars, and then they have an opportunity where they have to appear in public, and it's like, what happens there? That there is so much depth to that story that hits you between the lines, and but you can totally see the aspect of commentary on it, but it isn't so overt that that's what you're feeling. You're feeling what the characters are feeling. So you totally pulled it off in things like that. I was thinking about that story specifically. Um, how you've already mentioned about this growing from an experience you've had. How personal are some of the stories in this book to you? So how much of it is drawn from your experience as well as observation?
Oh, I mean, first, thank you for your kind words. I'm really grateful to you for all the nice things you've been saying. Um, a lot of this book is very personal. I mean, the story Analog Virtual was based very directly off my personal experience. Um, the stories that are a little bit about thought policing has to do with just observations of echo chambers in reality, in these little pockets. Avatars is a very personal one as well, because I have a really good friend who is a very well regarded digital artist, but they prefer to be anonymous for their own personal reasons. And a huge part of their lives revolves around a huge part of their life revolves around sustaining anonymity in a world that is constantly attempting to strip it away. Um, there's another story named Etudes, which is about an orphan from the outcast community, the analogs, who's been adopted into the virtual world. And her dream is to become a virtuoso pianist. And that's a very personal story, not because I've experienced what she experiences as an outsider, but because I've learned how to play the piano for a couple of decades. And so music is really close to my soul. And I wanted to express the relationship I have with my piano teacher through the relationship she has with her piano teacher. So there are little pockets of very personal narrative all through the book.
I love that story. It's absolutely perfect. And hearing you talk about music is really interesting because there's so much music through the book. Like you invent this whole genre of anatronica. And if you were to get someone to score this book, who would you choose to put the music together for it?
Oh my goodness, this is a dream question, Fraser. This is something I would love to do. Um, I think, if I were looking at Anatronica, because you mentioned it, we'll start there. It's this really electronic, very heavy on beats and samples kind of music. And when I was writing about it in my head, I was thinking of um, sort of Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails meets Rage Against the Machine, because it's also a very political form of music. So it's what the analogs use to express dissent. And so I would totally go with Trent Reznor and, Tom Morello and Zach De La Roca for Anatronica. When it comes to Neo Acoustica, which is the music of the elite, it's kind of rooted in classical music, but sort of the future of classical music potentially. And there, I think I would have to pick maybe Philip Glass, who's one of my favorite composers. And if it were hype is like pop music in today's world. I don't know. I think I'm just spoiled for choice. Maybe I would go with Dua Lipa and Miley, and just make it a little edgier than it is in the book, because it's a little tame in the book.
I love that, breaking it down. I was, when you said Rage Against the Machine, I was like, yes, I could totally see that for Anatronica. That was great. Um, just with regard to the other things that you've brought in, so music is like one of these allegories as to how the division between of the classes of society. Just explain a little bit about how society is structured and just these divisions that exist within Apex City.
Apex City is it's governed by an algorithm that maps civilization onto the bell curve. So, based on your productivity and your social image and expressing the right values and consuming the right pop culture, you kind of get scored. So, you earn points. And the bell curve then sorts you out. So, the top 20% of society are the virtual elite, and they've got endless access to all forms of privilege, from technology that ranges from the latest simulations to, climate control. So they are really the elite, and they are effectively snobs, right? You've got the middle 70%, and they're people who keep, the gears turning, like they're working hard, they're being productive, but they aren't at the cutting edge of society. Like they're not the most valued members in society. And so they're constantly motivated and encouraged to work harder so that they can kind of step it up and gain access to the absolute elite. Um, and the reason they've got to do this is because the price of failure is very stark. Um, falling to the bottom 10% on the bell curve means that you will soon be deported, you'll be branded an analog, you'll be moved to the other side of the city, which is a climate ravaged, wasteland. And you have no access to running water or electricity. And this is how society is structured in this future. And if you look at the types of thought policing that are done, going back to the music we were talking about, the elite are encouraged to consume high art. So you're talking about neo-acoustica and very classically inspired music, and the bottom 10% and the analogs, they consume all of the really infra stuff, right? Anatronica. What is that even?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. So you put it so much better than I could with explaining the way that society is segmented into these different percentages. The reason why I thought it would be so good for people to know that is because of you use so many allegories to be able to illustrate and to really nail home this division between the top 20%, the middle 70, and the bottom 10%. Allegories such as even the planting of a tree. It is so, they are so beautiful. When you were inventing them, did you come upon them by discovery, or did they just happen on the page, or did you purposefully set out to say, right, okay, I'm going to use this to separate that and this to separate that?
Initially, they just popped up on the page because I wasn't going about this in a very structured manner at first. And once I'd written the first couple of stories that I thought could belong to this world, I started noticing that I was very subconsciously putting down things that would create these discriminatory barriers between the elite and the outcasts in this society. And once that awareness dawned on me, I took several steps back and, sat down with pen and paper and thought, all right, I seem to be constructing this very stratified society. If I'm looking at the future, which I knew I was at that time, I'm looking into the near future. What are the other measures of how to demarcate privilege from the lack of privilege? And so I did a little bit of speculating, and I realized that, the climate crisis is going to be an enormous factor when it comes to the haves and the have nots, and the way both sides will have to contend with it. And so one of the allegories that came in was trees. So the elite in my universe have access to garden spaces. If you're in the top 20%, you can access houseplants if you're in the middle 70%. But if you're in the bottom 10%, you've got nothing. There is no green on your side of the city.
Yeah, and it in terms of world building, it adds so much. Did you find that you had to really rein yourself in and get the right balance with it? Because Apex City itself is amazing to imagine. Did you find that it was quite easy to sort of get run away with all of these kinds of ideas?
Absolutely. I was running amok at one point and kind of introducing so much newness because honestly, if you look at society the way it is structured today, there are so many axes that determine privilege and determine access to things that should be basic human rights but are not. Um, and just taking that into the future when you can foresee tons more technology and, quite honestly, tons more divisiveness, I had to kind of pull back and say, okay, pick the things that feel most natural to this world, to this book, and to the characters in it. So yeah, there was a lot of deletion on my early drafts.
Yeah, interesting about the idea of deletion. Were there any stories that you had which didn't make it into the book?
Yes, there were. There were a couple. One of them involved the heist of a prized neo-acoustica violin by the analogs, because So just for any listeners, the virtuals listen to a lot of neo-acoustic, and it's played on traditional instruments, but the analogs can only listen to synthesized music. So real artifacts as instruments are a very valuable thing. So one of the stories that I decided to get rid of was this heist story.
Oh wow, I would have loved to have read that one. That's you there is there are so many of these allegories that cross over through the stories though. Like for example, with the trees, the whole first part of the first story in the book is a heist. It's it's the 10% thief, which is the where the title of the book comes from, and they plant a tree in the analog world. And then through the book, there are these, I don't know if you can see it, but through the paperback, there are these trees that pop up between the stories. Um, how cool is that? First of all, that you've got these trees sort of cropping up through the book, but how deliberate on your part was that for including stuff like this in the paperback? Just these little surprises for the reader that you turn the page and okay, this is taking me deeper into this world in a new way. How important was that for you?
Oh, so to begin with, the paperback is just full credit to Solaris and the entire team at Solaris, because those beautiful pages with the trees, that was so unexpected, and I'm so grateful that they've done so much to make this book a beautiful reading experience. I did want to carry this notion of the value of trees on through the book, because um, I really think that, especially living in Bangalore, watching it develop over the years, I grew up here. And with all the benefits of development, which include, one would say a more profitable economy, the city is now more metropolitan than ever before, there are a lot of negatives. And the biggest one that I feel most passionate about is the blatant cutting down of trees everywhere, because you've got to expand and build new roadways and office spaces. So just including this as a recurring motive, because it keeps coming back all through the book, not just in terms of the illustration, but even as an idea. I don't want to go into spoilers, but there are trees of many kinds that keep popping up. That was really important to me.
What tree, if you'd have been the 10% thief, what tree would you have planted if you could have got to choose one?
Ooh, tricky. So I am very I love the jacaranda tree, which the 10% thief does plant. But I'm also very partial to rain trees. They're all over the city of mine. So I might have done a rain tree.
Awesome. That's really cool. One of the other things that really struck me about the stories and is how consistent a lot of the language is through the stories. So you have things like sayings that the characters say that are tied into the world, like when it glitches, it fries, or what the harvest is all the noise about, or even like just using the word 10% as almost like a swear word in the book. Um, how did you come up with these? And is there any of them that you would love to see on a t-shirt one day?
I would love to see when it glitches at fries on a t-shirt, because I I I mean technology is it's so moody, So I would love to put that on a t-shirt. I had a lot of fun coming up with these phrases. They would just pop into my head while I was writing, and I would think, oh, this sounds like a plausible swear word or a plausible kind of exclamation in this universe. Let me throw it in and see how it works. And when I found things that really kind of rolled off the tongue, in my opinion at least, I would just file them away to use in future stories. So stuff like what the harvest and 10%, yeah.
Was that a challenge when it came to editing to keep that consistent?
It was really difficult because I had to remember that I'd written this stuff, and as much as I tried to document it, and I really made a very sincere attempt to document it. It does tend to run away from you when you're in flow and kind of just so excited about an idea that you want to put it down. You think, oh, I'll make the notes on the spreadsheet later. And then I would just forget and come back while editing and think, oh, this is a funny phrase. I've never heard it before. Where did it come from?
That's great. I love that you had that relationship with editing where you're looking through it and you're like, what was all of this? It's like, that's so relatable. That's great. Um, how did you know when it was done? Was there a point where you were just like, you're in the editing trenches and you're going through it? Did you reach that point where you suddenly realize like, that's it, it's finished? Or did you struggle to sort of see the finishing line with it?
I eventually reached that point, but it took me a really long time because I just wasn't happy enough with it, and I was constantly fiddling with things like the connections between the stories. Some of them are overt, and some of them are very subtle. And I kept thinking, I can do more. I can maybe work another tiny little connection into this universe. Um, and that took a lot of time. The other thing that took a lot of time was just being happy with the balance, because we were talking earlier about making the characters relatable versus the social commentary, and then you bring the setting into it, and how it all works together. I would keep, it was like fidgeting with those old equalizer settings where I'd keep like turning one up and thinking, oh, this is out of balance now. I need to turn the others up too. And this went on for a while until it got to a point where I believed I was still fidgeting with these things. But it turned out that I was just using synonyms now, just replacing words with better words based on my mood for the day. And when I consistently did that for maybe a few weeks, I thought, okay, I am adding nothing to this book now. I think I need to let it go because this is being counterproductive. And that's when I eventually felt like it was good enough to attempt to get published.
That's awesome. And then in terms of publishing, because you said about it being good enough to get published, this is not the first time that this book has been published, is it? From what I understand, it was picked up a couple of years ago, and now it's been picked up again for expanding it into worldwide rights, right? What was that journey like? And what are you most proud of? Is it the fact that this book got picked up and you saw it in print for the first time, or now that people everywhere are going to get a chance to read it?
Um, yeah, the journey has been crazy. I didn't expect it to come this far, honestly. I was genuinely very humbled and very happy when it released. It released in South Asia first, so pretty much India and Sri Lanka and a few other countries. And I was so happy to see it out in the world then. And I thought, okay, this is good. Let's move on and write the next one. And then one thing led to another, and I thought, okay, maybe I should send this out to agents and try and find a bigger audience. And it took 3 years, and here we are again, and it's about to be out in the world again. And honestly, the most exciting thing for me about this whole process is the thought that there will be more people reading it, because I I write, of course, because I want to put my ideas down and express myself, but I publish because I want to find readers who maybe read part of it, some of it, all of it, and think, wow, that resonated. Um, that is such a delightful experience, because then I feel like, okay, there's more than me on this wavelength, and it's beautiful to be part of a bigger community of people who appreciate or enjoy the same thing.
And do you think that's one of the really lovely things about science fiction, that it can be appreciated by everybody?
Absolutely. I think one of the beautiful things about science fiction, and it's the way I see it, it's a sandbox. So I can kind of reshape reality. sort of switch up, shift the parameters around, um, have it be relatable, but also a different universe, and then throw a bunch of people into that universe and say, all right, get along or don't get along. Let's see how this turns out. And I think being able to move away from uh, realism in many ways, not that it's entirely unreal, it is a lot of science fiction is a mirror to the present. Um, but even being able to mirror the present in an unfamiliar space gives you a lot of cool insight about the present without it being tied down to a specific um, realist association. And I think that's really where the power of science fiction lies, because then it's suddenly relatable to so many more people.
I guess it's a little bit like being a mirror to the present, but also trying to make it a window to the future. Do you find that there is a specific what there's a specific skill or a specific things that you've learned about writing this book that is going to help you to keep writing books like that, which have got that duality to them of, they're about our world, but they're also about what our world could be as well.
I think, one of the biggest things I learned while writing this is not to not to really get stressed out by the science behind stuff, because you know um, it's not predictive. And that is another thing that I learned. Like, I should just step away from the burden of predictive of being predictive about the future and just toy with speculating upon it. Initially, I was really intimidated because I thought, is this too bleak? Is this dark? Is this kind of like being a prophet of doom? And I did not want to be a prophet of doom. And then I thought, no, um, it's speculative. It's got its moments. It's also optimistic. And I think just the headspace of knowing that um, that all of this is play, really. You're talking about serious things and you're reflecting about a lot of serious stuff, but you are playing with it while you do so. And the most important thing is to enjoy it while you're writing it, and then leave the rest to, you know, sheer dumb luck, which is how I think it eventually found its way out into the world. Because there are there are so many books that take so much longer that are absolutely brilliant, um, and so many writers with such great struggles who have always faced that through such long spans in their careers, that I think the outcomes are very, very much like winning the lottery. So that's another thing that I've learned.
That's that's brilliant. I love that. Uh, you're talking about speculating as opposed to trying to be predictive. When you're speculating, what's your process for that? Is it what do you give greater priority to? Experience or to research or to observation or to conversation, or where do you start when it comes to speculating about the future?
A lot of the time, it is observation. I tend to kind of look at how people are behaving in a given moment or in relationship to each other, whether it's in real life or online. And that's an instant springboard to me. And once I notice something that seems to be a very interesting behavioral quirk or a trend, then I go off and do a bit of research, and I, you know, think, okay, how could this turn out in 50 years time, or 100 years, or even 1,000 years? Um, and that's when I start looking at it through multiple lenses. So if it's a behavioral quirk, then what happens when I change the dimensions of what gender means in the future, of what success means in the future, of how society is structured in the future? But it all starts off with just kind of people watching, I think, for me personally.
That's amazing. And you do your people watching in Bangalore, is that right? In India, which is where this story is set. How important is the setting that you write in to the setting that you then imagine when you're creating? Do you think that there is a correlation between where you are when you write it and what you're writing?
I absolutely think so. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a very strong correlation. I feel like having written this novel, I would not have been able to write it any other way, because so much of it is rooted in Bangalore, which is a city I grew up in, I kind of live in now. And it's so intertwined with my experiences of the city. So everything from kind of the jagged form or the shape of the novel, the sort of the choppiness of it, really, that is what Bangalore feels like to me right now. And that just bled its way into the prose.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's great. And are there other stories that, because of you having access to science fiction in Southeast Asia, is there other stories that were like this that have been popular there, or popular in that part of the world, that haven't yet found a wider audience? Are there stories like that that you would love to see the same thing happen to them that have happened for you with the 10% Thief?
Absolutely. I think, science fiction is sort of um, relatively new in Southeast Asia, in terms of South Asia, especially where science fiction writers have been a product of more recent times, especially writing in English. There has been speculative fiction in other languages that are, stories that have been translated into English, but writers writing science fiction in English in South Asia, that's much newer. Um, the thing is, for the longest time, science fiction hasn't been a defined genre in in India, certainly. So growing up, like we would just read books. They would just be books, imagined worlds, perhaps, that you could possibly tell this was science fiction versus fantasy because fantasy is more magic based. But that would be it, right? So you'd read this whole spectrum of things, and now there are people creating science fiction. One book that made its way across last year, which I absolutely adored, is Chosen Spirits, or The City Inside, which is what it's known as in the UK and the US, or rather just the US, I think, right now. Um, so The City Inside is brilliant because it is near future and it's set in Delhi, which is the capital of India. And there are so many thematic mirrors to what appears in The 10% Thief, but the approach is so different. So a lot of the concerns are shared, but the kind of the future that's imagined, the outcomes, the characters' journeys are so different. And um, if you were in India and you did compare, say, life in Delhi to life in Bangalore, you would absolutely get a sense of the aesthetic of each city as a very unique individual identity. And I'm really glad that The City Inside is out right now. And, I hope more people buy it and read it because it's brilliant. Um, so that is one book that has absolutely, you know, been very similar in the near future space. Um, I hope there are more. There is, of course, fantasy and a lot more fantasy and some science fiction being written. So I'm waiting for all the books to show up.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's such a refreshing setting, and the whole book feels so refreshing. It's absolutely brilliant. Talking about going right back to the start and your experience in writing games and having so much experience in that. If this book were to be um, adapted into a game, what kind of game would you like it to be adapted into?
Oh wow, this is another one of my dream questions because I keep thinking about this, right? Like I would love to build a game. It's so time consuming. Um, I think I would like a very sort of point and click adventure type game, honestly. Very narrative driven and text driven. something like the Stanley Parable, which was very satirical, set in a room. Um, and you're this virtual, and your job is to just keep pushing buttons. And if you push enough buttons, you ascend to the elite. And if you don't, whoops, sorry, try again. So I would think of it as something like the Stanley Parable meets Reigns, where the game doesn't take itself too seriously. It exists in the space of satire. Yeah.
That's awesome. That would be so cool. And just make sure you release it to everybody and not just like the top 20%, because that would
Yeah.
be beyond ironic, right? Uh, What's what are you working on next? So we talked about the 10% thief. For anybody who is who is interested in it, it's coming out soon. What's the next project that is on the horizon for you?
The next project is a complete change of scene. It's far future, and it is set on another planet. So, we're talking very far future and very speculative indeed. And the story revolves around sort of soft power colonization and the future of food. So that's where I'm going next.
The future of food. That's I mean, that has tickled my taste buds in ways that you can't even imagine, Lavanya. That is so exciting to think about. What where do you stand on the whole food thing? Because obviously there's so many different types of food across the world. What's your favorite?
Oh, I love all food, Fraser. It's impossible to pick a favorite. I think it really depends on how I'm feeling in the moment, because every culture and every cuisine has such such a unique identity, and it's also beautiful. Um, I think food really is something that brings everyone together as humanity, because you can really appreciate it. You can appreciate diversity in something as very essential as taste. And but for all of the goodness that it can do, food can also be really divisive, and it can be very political. And so I'm kind of playing with these dimensions, or attempting to play with these dimensions in the next book.
That sounds so good. I love what you say though about food, because there is just something that it triggers in people, like the somebody's favorite type of food or like favorite dish, like their mum used to make it. It reaches people in such a deep way. I love that you're playing around with that. That is so exciting. I love it. And who doesn't like food, right? Food is great. In writing this book, this next one, have you been eating the foods that you're writing about?
Oh yeah, I have been doing so much food-based research. It is delightful to write, honestly. When I wrote the 10% Thief, I'm speculating on the very near future, the Elon Musk future, and that's not it's not a joyous process. But speculating about food, come on, that is so much fun. I've been cooking the stuff I'm writing about. I've been eating it. I've been doing so much research. So much of my reading is in the form of recipe books, and hey, they're so colorful. They're delightful to engage with. Everything from theories of molecular gastronomy to how to make, I guess, the perfect lasagna. I'm reading about all of that. And just for fun, I'm totally slacking off and watching MasterChef and the Great British Bake Off and calling it research.
It sounds like an absolute dream project. That's amazing. I love it. The so yeah, I wish you all of the best with that, Lavanya. And if you come across any amazing recipes, please share them, because yeah, I'm all for that. That's amazing. Um, with regard to the 10% thief, let's just try and sum it up for people. If you could sum it up in 3 words, what would you choose?
Hard. Okay, let me give this a go. I would call it uh, metaphorical, um, A mirror to the present? Actually, you know what? Let's go with that. A mirror to the present in the future. That's more than 3
Oh, I love
words,
it.
but I'm trying.
You got perfect. You can't sum it up better than that. It is a mirror to the present in the future. Everybody go and pick up The 10% Thief. I cannot recommend it enough. It's an absolutely incredible book. For those of you who want to read the review that I wrote on it, it's available on FanFiAddict. You see there, it gets a 10 out of 10. It's a stunning, stunning book. Thank you so much, Lavanya, for joining me to talk about it and for delving into it with me. I've really enjoyed it. Let let everybody know where they can find you, your social handles, where they can find out more, and they can interact with you and give you loads of praise for the book, because you're going to be receiving it because it's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If you want to know more about what I do and how I spend my time, then you can follow me on Instagram. I am at lavanya.ln. And I'm on Twitter, where I'm at Lavanya_LN. So find me there. Pick up the book if you happen to read it. I really hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much, Frasier, for your really kind words about it and for being such a wonderful host and having me on the show.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. It is, in terms of interviews, this is definitely in the top 1% of the bell curve, that is for sure. But
But
thank
we
you
won't
so much for
charge them
joining me.
for it.
No, don't worry. It's all good.
Yeah.
Everybody can get access to it. It's all good. But no, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for spending time with me and taking time. And it's great to meet you, and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. And all the best to you.